Barry Bonds, the godson of Willie Mays, wrote on Instagram, and I quote, "I'm beyond devastated and overcome with emotion. I have no words to describe what you mean to me. You helped shape me to be who I am today. Thank you for being my godfather and always being there. Give my dad a hug for me. Rest in peace, Willie. I love you forever." I know of no one who loves the game of baseball like my friend and our guest, Tim Kurkjian, who joins us now. This is a sport, Tim, that lends itself to heroes, whether we're kids or whether we're grown. And when you list your baseball heroes, where does it begin?
Well, it begins with Willie Mays. Willie Mays is, for me, the greatest player I've ever seen. And I was captivated by baseball at the earliest age. But when I saw Willie Mays lead off the '65 All-Star game on a color TV in our house, I just could not believe what I was watching. He was the greatest player. As Johnny Bench once put it, he was the perfect baseball player. He had the perfect build. He had a style to him that nobody else has ever had. I grew up 3,000 miles from San Francisco, and I worship Willie Mays. Every time he was on TV, which wasn't very often for me, I couldn't miss it. That's how great he was. And I'm telling you, Scott, when he broke in 1951, he was the greatest combination of power, speed, and defense that the game had ever seen. And here it is, 73 years later, and I believe with all my heart, he is still the greatest combination of power, speed, and defense that the game has ever seen. That's how great Willie Mays was.
It strikes me, Tim, and you mentioned it about the television. I jotted this down earlier, that so many of the pictures and the images are in black and white, but he played in such vivid Technicolor, didn't he? Just whether it was the combination of the aesthetic and the technical brilliance, it feels like that's perhaps uniquely his, isn't it?
It is. And again, that '65 All-Star game that I'm talking about was the first game that we ever watched on a color television in our house. And it was just breathtaking to watch him come out to the line for the pregame introductions and then to stand in the box and hit a home run like that. I cannot even begin to tell you how many people from that era felt that Willie Mays was their hero. And this many years later, he still is. And Scott, of all the things about him that amazed me, and I met him and interviewed him many times, he had the biggest, strongest hands I have ever seen. Dwayne Kuiper, who does the Giants games on TV, and of course a former major leaguer, he told me once that his dad, Dwayne's dad, always said, "You have to win a handshake when you shake someone's hand." But you couldn't with Willie Mays. That's how big his hands were. And Pete Rose once told me, he said, "I'm as big as Willie Mays." That's what Pete Rose said as far as size goes. And he hit 660 homers, and I hit 160 homers. That's how strong Willie Mays was. And that combination of power and speed and grace and base running, trust me, there has never been a baseball player like Willie Mays.
Leo DeRocher, his manager with the Giants, in his book said, and I'll quote, "If somebody came up and hit 450, stole 100 bases, and performed a miracle in the field every day, I'd still look you right in the eye and tell you that Willie was better." He inspired that level of awe from his peers and those whose job it was to manage. And I think that's really instructive, isn't it, Tim?
It is. I once asked Frank Robinson, one of the greatest players of all time, I said to Frank, "Is Willie Mays the greatest player you've ever seen?" And Frank rolled his eyes, typical Frank, looked at me and said, "Of course he is. Who else could there be?" That's how great Willie Mays was to all of his peers. Scott, he's the only player in Major League history to have a 300 average, 300 home runs, and 10 Gold Gloves. Keep in mind, he hit .302 with 660 homers and 12 Gold Gloves, and he led the league in steals 3 years in a row. He is the greatest defensive center fielder of all time, and you might make a case he's the greatest defensive player at any position of all time. And when he robbed Vic Wertz of the home run in the '54 series, Bob Feller once told me, we knew he was going to catch that ball. Some people think it's the greatest catch of all time. We knew he was going to catch it. And Willie told me once, that's not even one of the top 10 catches that I ever made. And some people call it the greatest catch in Major League history. That's how great he was.
Whether it's the numbers, the stories, or the memories that the man elicits from those like you, Tim, that saw him, I just feel that those of you that got to truly see him and appreciate him saw won't ever come this way again, will it?
No, and again, Scott, I'm 67 years old, and the only thing I got going for me still is that I am really old, and I got to see Willie Mays play in his prime. So anyone who wants to talk about today's players who are bigger, stronger, faster, and better than ever, they really have to go back to 1951 or the mid-60s to recognize what a transcendent talent he was. Reggie Jackson compared him to, of course, Michael Jordan and Jim Brown and Barishnikov and Steph Curry shooting before a game. That's who he compared Willie Mays to. He's a combination of all of those. That's why most people consider him the greatest player they've ever seen, and you can count me in on that, and I'm not even sure there's a close second.